Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Tuesday. Happy divisional round week, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down that Rams beatdown over the Minnesota Vikings, as well as looking at a way too early 2025 first round mock draft. Just discussing some ball. We're not trying to be too serious about it, but never too early to get our minds right ahead of next fantasy season. But of course, I cannot accomplish this alone. And accordingly, I am joined by Fantasy Life Director of Analytics all around baller. He has the best hair in the freaking country, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Happy Tuesday, Dwain.
Man, I don't know if I have the best hair in my household. Ian, Camden's got the hair going. We've got a guinea pig, Ozzy, who has got a whole body full of hair, not just a head full of hair. So, but I'll take it, man. I appreciate it. The hair thing is probably like closer to reality than calling me The Rock. When there is an actual Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. But hey, I'll take it. I really do appreciate all the kind of comments from you. It always gets me super hyped for the show.
You are all natural, unlike, Dwayne Johnson, as much as he wants to try to push that ridiculous narrative. So for that, I do appreciate it. And you have better hair than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Dwayne. So hopefully The Rock is not listening to this. But yeah, guys, again, loaded show. So let's get right into it, kicking things off with that Rams 27-9 victory over the Vikings. Dwayne, this one was 24-3 at halftime. Really was just another instance of, second time in as many weeks. Sam Darnold looking lost, looking like he was seeing ghosts, like he was playing for the Jets all over again. But we'll start off with the winners, and that was Matthew Stafford and company. 209 yards and a pair of touchdowns through the air for Mr. Stafford. One to Kyren Williams, one also. I don't see who he threw the other one to, but I'm sure it was a great pass as well. Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp doing their collective
Davis
things.
Allen, I believe. It was a tight end.
Davis Allen, that's right. It was Higbee going off early, but yes, it was indeed Davis Allen snagging the second one. So, yeah, man, look, we have not always seen this from the Rams. I mean, they had a 3-game streak towards the end of the season where they could only score 17 points. So, again, not an every week occurrence, but ever since week 8 or 9, when we have seen healthy Cooper Kupp-ish, healthy Puka Nacua, Stafford doing his thing, these are the sort of high-end outcomes that the Rams are capable of.
Yeah, for sure. But what's interesting is it's like the Rams are trying to figure out who is going to be their number 2 option in the passing game. Because over the last 4 games, Ian, guess what Cooper Kupp's target share is? I don't know that you can go low enough in your head over the last 4 games, Cooper Kupp.
What, 4%?
Well, yeah, you did go low enough. I set you up on 11%. Okay. He's still sitting at 25% for the year in the games that he's played. But man, over these last 4 games, 12, 19, 12, 4%. And I spent a good part of last night. The game got out of hand so quick. I was like, what am I going to do to make this game interesting? And I just started watching Cooper Kupp. Number one, I was just noticing how often he wasn't on the field. Only a 69% route participation. Nice. You mentioned Tyler Higbee. Yes, early in the game, he was the guy that was really getting those underneath targets instead of a lot of the ones that Cooper Kupp used to get. And he obviously injured his chest and he went to the hospital in stable condition. We don't have any more news on it though, but it sounds like he's obviously super iffy for next weekend, but they kept it going with the tight ends, even after the injury to Higbee. So we've got a 3-way rotation. If you get Higbee back, you got a 4-way rotation, but it's almost like the Rams are trying to figure out, okay, who is going to be the number 2 outside of Puka Nacua? Because if someone finally takes him away, how are we going to be able to win games? And man, just watching Cooper Kupp, he was getting challenged at the line of scrimmage very often. I mean, he was just struggling, Ian. You got to go back and just see it for yourself. But a lot of times in the past, we would have seen this sort of coverage, and it's something where, man, when Stafford sees that at the line of scrimmage, he's probably his mouth's probably watering, thinking, man, I'm about to hit a big play to Cooper Kupp, and it just wasn't there. So that's an issue. So that's a concern because can the tight ends really be enough to be your number 2 weapon in the passing game, especially if you don't have Tyler Higbee? But yeah, for last night, the Rams looked great. Didn't have to do a lot. Stafford was honestly he was on cruise control by halftime. Yeah.
Really was. So Kupp obviously had that grade 3 high ankle sprain back in week 2. Maybe that's still impacting him, but that's been the case, Dwayne. I mean, I remember we were going through some of our real-time sports teams last week and just how could we actually see Kupp, making this leap back into, wide receiver 1 range, and neither of us could really wrap our minds around it happening. This has been how he's looked for most of the season. I'm looking at ESPN's advanced receiver ratings right now. Love their open score, which again always tries to quantify a receiver separation. And out of 111 qualified wide receivers, Jonathan Mingo dead last, so you know it's at least directionally correct stat. Cooper Kupp 103rd, Dwain, right there with guys like David Moore, Michael Wilson, Jalen Polk. So yeah, again, not great company. Is he really 103rd? You know, maybe not, but still pretty bad regardless. So Kyren Williams, you mentioned it, you know, not exactly the biggest game. Did wind up getting 92 total yards though. Fumbled for the 6th time this season, but Blake Corum's injured, and even if he wasn't, don't really think Sean McVay cares at this point. Did force 7 missed tackles, so continuing to be pretty slippery with the football in his hands. We'll be talking about Puka Nacua a bit more here in a little bit. So in the meantime, get right Tyler Higbee. They're going to be traveling to Philly to take on the Eagles again next Sunday at 3 p.m. Hopefully they have figured out how to somewhat contain Saquon Barkley since their last meeting. Now, Dwayne, let's go over to the Vikings. And, you know, we were saying in the pre-show, man, how much money has Sam Darnold lost himself over the course of his last 8 quarters of football? Because, again, no denying how great this guy played during the first 16, 17 weeks of the year. Legit MVP candidate. Not saying he should win it over Lamar or Josh, obviously, but if you had to list 5 guys, I'm not sure how you could really leave Darnold off it. But, man, that was rough. 9 sacks, Dwayne. A lot of them seemed like they were on him.
Yeah, I mean, with Darnold, look, again, like a great year overall. Like, I don't think we can take that away from him. I was to the point last night where I just felt bad for him. You know it's bad, Ian, whenever you're in a wild card game, the last game of your season probably, you're down by 3 scores. But, I mean, if you get a quick score, like, you at least make it interesting. You put a little bit of pressure on the Rams. I think we're at the probably 6-minute mark, you know, in the 4th quarter. Broadcast team was actually doing a nice job of talking about it as well. But it's just kind of like, man, they just wanted to get on the bus. They were done. They were like, no, let's run the ball into like an 8-man box. Like, let's do other things. We don't want Sam Darnold dropping back. Let's slow the game down. It's honestly, it's like one of those nightmares that we all have about our profession. Like, I every once in a while have a nightmare that, like, I show up, we get on the show, and let's just completely forget everything about football. That's basically what happened to Sam Darnold last night in front of everyone. And so I was actually feeling pretty bad for him. Here's what I'm going to say about the guy. Like, he can hit every throw in the playbook, Ian. Like, we've seen him spin it as good as anyone this season, but the issues that really like hurt him early on in his career, and then in Carolina, even after that year when he got off to a hot start, you know, is, man, if there's any sort of even semblance like of pressure, right, it's a major problem for Sam Darnold. It seems to short circuit the decision making. That's when he goes into turnover mode. The accuracy also tends to have issues, and then just, you know, holding the ball and just completely freezing up when you see the defenders coming. And I have to put some of this on Kevin O'Connell. Look, you basically had this exposed last week by the Lions. They didn't get as many sacks, but there was a lot of pressure on Sam Darnold, really disrupted the passing game. And I was a little bit disappointed. You got to know the Rams are going to come out and try to recreate some of those same looks to get that pressure. And it was just something that they were not prepared to handle in a playoff game. So I think that's also a knock against KOC.
And it's a great point. It was actually something that Peyton Manning and Bill Belichick were talking about on the Manning cast, where you do look at some of the concepts, and it was almost one shot play after another. They finally get a nice 20-yard comeback to Justin Jefferson. What happens next? They try to run this fake screen, takes too much time, and he ends up taking the sack. So really, you don't see too many just quicker hitting, easy button sort of plays out of this offense. And accordingly, Darnold was out there yesterday with, again, an average target depth well north of 10 yards. So again, far more good than bad from Darnold and KOC this season. Certainly wasn't their, you know, brightest hour though last night. So I couldn't agree more again about Sam Darnold as well. Just really under pressure. It's like Dwayne, he just operates almost like, I know people listen to podcasts on 1.5 or 2 times speed, and I talk fast, so apologies for that. But man, it's like Darnold plays at like 0.5 or 0.75 speed compared to some of these other quarterbacks. Hey, same song, gets out at the end of the day. He has a great arm. He can make some great throws, but man, again, just that quick processing speed never quite been a semblance of his game. Do you think he is the Vikings starting quarterback in week 1 next year, Dwayne?
All comes down to money. But this is going to make it really tough, because this is also going to have the fans, you know, as good of a season as he had. Like, this is what the fans are going to remember. It's going to be a bitter taste in their mouth. It's also going to be what the owner's going to remember. He's got to actually, you know, sign that check. Sam Darnold cost himself a lot of money. in these last two games, because now people are like, wow, like he can do all these things, but he still has these major issues. And can we really win big with a player like that? So he's got to go somewhere where he's got mind meld with the offensive coordinator, like what he's had with Kevin O'Connell. Also going to need to go somewhere where you've got multiple weapons that he can throw the ball to. I don't think he's the kind of guy that can really lift everyone else around him. If you get him in a really good scheme, get him with some good weapons, which obviously the Vikings have, I do think good things can happen. So I will say this: I would not blame the Vikings for bringing him back if it's at the right contract level, right? I mean, there's honestly like a chance right now. I mean, Sam Darnold's probably got a starting job somewhere, but like he could also still just be a backup. There's a lot of teams now where some teams are going to view him as a backup. At least here, I think he could be, fighting for the starting job. It would have to be a battle, but that's the challenge. Man, you don't want to pay too much, because if McCarthy comes out, looks great in training camp next year, looks great in the preseason, and you're ready to roll with him, you got to be able to give the young guy a chance to.
Estimated franchise tag right now for a quarterback is $41 million. So the Vikings can afford it. They have the fifth most, projected effective cap space ready for them ahead of this next offseason. But, the whole kind of point of drafting one of these shiny first round quarterbacks is to have the sort of advantages that go with having, that higher end play locked into a rookie contract for 4 or 5 years. And you're kind of forfeiting that again if you are just going to go ahead and pay Darnold all kinds of money. So I agree with you. I do think we found out Darnold is a top 32 quarterback on the planet. He should deserve that starting spot somewhere. Don't think it really should be in Minnesota, though. Similar sentiment could be true for Aaron Jones. Wasn't able to get too much going last night, just 60 total yards. He'll be a free agent. And then again, disappointing performances from the wide receivers, just 58 and 29 yards respectively from Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Nice touchdown from TJ Hawkinson. And nice season overall for the Vikings. I know you guys have been through so much, but again, if you could have gone back and just told yourself after that McCarthy injury, hey, you're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be 14-3. Unfortunate first round loss in the playoffs. Again, could have been a lot worse there. So we'll see you next season, Vikings. But now, guys, time to get into, again, our way too early 2025 first round mock draft right after this quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwayne, we both know there's nothing like being at a game in person. I'm sure being at that game in Arizona last night was fantastic. Great turnout from the fans, awesome pregame moment as well. Truly was great to see, again, the NFL community come around a great cause. And accordingly, guys, if you're trying to get into some game action as well, make sure you go to Game Time. It is my go-to source for finding amazing tickets, not just for sports, though, actually for concerts and shows, too. I was scrolling through the Game Time app the other day, and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks. And let me tell you what, it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats. And Game Time makes it so easy. It is truly a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can find out for yourself by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. All right, Dwayne, 2025 first round mock draft presented by the fine folks at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Remember, hard days deserve a hard lemonade. And speaking of hard days, man, trying to put this together and just stick to 12 names as we sit here on January 14th wasn't my easiest endeavor, Dwayne, but you know what? If it was easy, everyone would freaking do it. That's why we appreciate hard things like Mike's Hard Lemonade again. So let's kick things off again, just going 101 through the 112. You can find my full article on fantasylife.com. Going to throw my names out there, and Dwayne's going to tell me all the reasons why I am just a, dweeb, idiot, stupid person, whatever he has on his mind. So let's kick things off with one that I don't think will be too controversial, though. And that is Bengals wide receiver Jahmyr Chase, the Triple Crown winner, only trailed Lamar freaking Jackson in PPR points per game this past season. Still just 24 years old. And Dwayne, look, there's a lot of great wide receivers in the league, but from a talent perspective, I think we can agree Jahmyr Chase is right there with anyone. From a volume perspective, well, he just led the freaking NFL in targets, and that was with T. Higgins still in town. He will be a free agent this offseason, as we know. And I do think the differentiator, the thing that takes Chase to that next level ahead of Justin Jefferson, ahead of CeeDee Lamb, is the simple fact that we're tied to Joe Burrow here.
Yeah, I mean, getting to play with Joe Burrow in a pass-first offense, and then obviously Ja'Marr Chase being an elite talent of his own, he does check all of the boxes, all the underlying data points that we like to look at. And I'm not going to list them all because, I mean, it's just silly. Everybody knows that Ja'Marr Chase is a really good player, but he ranks highly in all of those. So the underlying data does match up with the fantasy performance. Again, you mentioned a young player. So the thing I would just say with Ja'Marr Chase is he's just one of these guys, Ian, that they're super rare. Like, he really can win at every level of the field. This year, they use him more in the intermediate underneath area. They let him do a lot of his work after the catch. But we know that Ja'Marr Chase is also a guy that can get over the top at any moment. We have seen that in the past. You can give him the slant and just let him take it. You can give him the screen play and let him break it for a long touchdown. So he just has every element to his game. Contested catches, you want that. He can do that. You got a guy that you need to get the ball to in the red zone, in the end zone. He can do that as well. So there just isn't a weakness to Ja'Marr Chase's game. The only potential thorn in his side has honestly been potential talent target competition from a guy like T. Higgins, and we may not even have T. Higgins back with the Bengals. So we could see even more targets for Ja'Marr Chase. Not that he necessarily needs them, but it could be a situation where he even gets a heavier workload next year. And obviously this year, he already ranked very highly from a standpoint. Target share, wasn't as high as some other teams. When you go look at his targets per game, because of what you mentioned, how often they throw the ball, and the fact that Joe Burrow loves him, those numbers were really good.
And again, really the only potential thorns in his side are, you named it, the potential for T. Higgins to be back and maybe complicate the volume. But we just saw it. It was more or less fine. It makes sense if the Bengals defense is a little bit better. They couldn't be much worse. And it really did help this, team turn into this constant shootout, red zone friendly, viewing experience for everyone, other than Bengals fans. And the third issue would just be a potential holdout. But man, how can you not pay this guy? I know Cincy has been cheap historically, but after this Triple Crown season, man, cannot wrap my mind around that. And also, just again, if you are going to be letting T. Higgins walk, and that would kind of solve the first problem, you would think that would go hand in hand with Chase getting paid as well. So Ja'Marr Chase, the just overall number one player ahead of 2025 drafts, maybe could change in standard, but again, we are mostly sticking with full PPR here. So good stuff there, Dwayne. That now takes us to our 102. And right now I'm going with the running back, and that is Saquon Barkley, Mr. 2K himself. Would have been the overall RB1 if he had chased Eric Dickerson's record in week 18. That now goes to Jahmyr Gibbs, though. So again, looking at Saquon, it's just incredible, just talent, obviously, in an offense that loves to run the football. Amazing offensive line. They're only projecting to lose maybe one starter ahead of next year. I mean, yes, it'd be a lot cooler if we didn't have so many tush pushes going on. Saquon league high 11 carries where he was stopped at the 1 yard line and then did not score a touchdown on the same drive. But again, Dwayne, yeah, I would like to have 20 touchdown upside here, but even without it, I just don't see how Saquon is going to fall out of the positions top 5 at the worst, given the benefit of good health, which again, he's not injured. I don't know why we should actively be expecting that to change.
Yeah, I mean, 21.9 fantasy points per game. Obviously, that ranks number one. We talk a lot about what's the best predictor of next season's success. It is actually fantasy points, guys. But also, all the utilization was there as well. He ranked highly in the utilization score for the season. So this is a guy that can play on all the downs. To your point, Ian, doesn't get as many of the targets as he used to as a Giant. Has to give up some of those rushing attempts to Jalen Hurts inside the 5 yard line. But you've got a really good offensive line. Saquon still clearly showed this year that he's got that extra gear. I mean, talk about the highlight play of all highlight plays for the season. Ooh. Saquon has that on his reel. So, I mean, when you look at him, 125 rushing yards per game, ranks first in the NFL. Carries of 10 plus yards, so still showing off that explosiveness. He ranks fifth, 13.3% of his carries went for that far. On the field, plenty for the passing plays, just not as many targets, but still involved enough, right? That it's not an absolute Achilles heel for Saquon. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can make an argument for Bijan Robinson. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think knowing David Montgomery will be back, I think it's tough to include. Jahmyr Gibbs needs luck to really enter the equation and essentially knock David Montgomery out to give him a chance to challenge Saquon and Bijan for this top spot. I think the next guy you could honestly argue, if you're just talking pure ceiling outcomes, is probably Derrick Henry versus what we would see with Saquon Barkley. But I think that Saquon as well as Bijan Robinson are in a tier by themselves. And I think you can make arguments for either one of them. Bijan we'll talk about here more in a minute, but it's those two guys at the top of boards for running back.
I agree. We will be talking more about Bijan in just a minute. But last couple notes on Saquon. Again, even with that relative lack of touchdown upside, I should say, guys, take away every single touchdown that Saquon would have scored this season, he still would have been the PPR RB9. So again, not saying he's going to rush for 2,000 yards every year, but behind that big, just fantastic Eagles offensive line, we are dealing with a guy who I do think has a better chance of maintaining that gaudy yards per carry average than others. Final point, Dwayne, let's face it, Father Time undefeated. Saquon will be 28 in February. My research I've done on the age cliff shows that running backs usually don't really start falling off until age 29. Even that, though, sometimes has a bit of a survivorship bias involved in it. And I believe that was your takeaway as well when kind of researching this deeper this last offseason.
Yeah, but survivorship bias can also be a good thing for the players that represent it, which are typically, if you go back and look at it, really good players. So I think Saquon is part of that conversation. This year, I think you and I had Saquon as like our running back 5 or 6. It's not like we were outlandishly low on him, but that did put him towards the end of round 1 or in round 2 for most fantasy drafts. I did not draft enough of him. I'm going to make sure that I have more next year. Another year older, not necessarily ideal, but to your point, not something that we've seen in the past for guys as good as Saquon necessarily mean that they're done.
The only people that truly drafted enough of Saquon were those that had him on 100% of their fantasy squads. And kudos to you if you were one of those lucky individuals. So Ja'Marr Chase and Saquon Barkley off the board at the top. And that now takes us to our 103. Someone who honestly I would not blame at all if you wanted to take first. And that is Mr. Bijan Robinson. Dwayne, I feel like he honestly, not that people were ignoring him this season, but if we didn't have Saquon and Derrick Henry doing their things, I think there would have been a lot more hype going around Bijan. 1,887 total yards, 15 touchdowns as a 22-year-old, always looking fantastic doing it. Had the second most missed tackles forced in the league on the ground and was 4th in explosive runs. So again, if we want to kind of make our 4 pillars of evaluating any running back in fantasy, the personal talent, just described it. He is fantastic. The workload, well, only Saquon Barkley had more touches than Bijan last year. The offensive environment, very good continued offensive line in Atlanta, a group we can trust there. And age, I mean, Bijan is just 23 once January 30th comes around. Bijan really does check all those boxes. The only potential issue is Michael Penix just kind of rendering this offense as a lower tier scoring group, but I wouldn't consider that exactly likely.
Yeah, and there were moments this year where they just got Tyler Algier a little bit more involved than we probably would have liked. But down the stretch, they really did turn to Bijan Robinson. So hoping that they would continue to do that next year. He obviously rewarded them with great play. You look at him across the board, to your point, like whether you want to talk about tackles avoided, explosive rush rate, all those things, he was well above the NFL average. Not at the levels of Jahmyr Gibbs and some of these other guys, but man, a true every down back. If we look at utilization score, he had a 9.1 for the season. That was second behind only Alvin Kamara, who obviously had a huge target share, which is really driving up how Kamara did so well, because we know targets are worth more than rushing attempts, and the utilization score, it counts for that. It knows that. So whenever you look at Bijan Robinson, though, man, like he does everything. You got a 14% target share. You got a 65% route participation, 62% of the team's rushing attempts. And one of the things that we looked at last offseason, guys, the most predictive things for running back the following season is actually their volume and role the year before. Not the case at wide receiver. Just because you got routes doesn't mean you're going to get routes the next year. It really does come back down to, can you earn targets and things like that. But for these running backs, whenever you see them get to play in these every down roles, there's something that coaches are looking for, and they think Bijan has it. And so I would say, looking at it, it's a situation where I'm with you. Like, I think it is honestly a coin flip between Bijan Robinson as well as Saquon. I do agree, though, Michael Penix is still a question right now. And honestly, so is the offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson.
The one good thing about Robinson, coming from that Sean McVay tree, as we've seen with Kyron Williams, very much willing to just leave one running back on the field more games than not. So, yeah, we'll get a little bit of Tyler Algier out there, but Algier in his own right is a good NFL running back. Again, didn't stop Bijan from doing all sorts of great things in his second season. Hopefully even bigger things to come here in 2025 and beyond. Let's get to our 104, though, Dwayne. Someone who was going about this range last year, but I think we had a few more questions than we probably will this time around, and that is Vikings wide receiver receiver 1, Justin Jefferson, the NFL's all-time leader in receiving yards per game at this point at 95.6. And really, whether it's been Kirk Cousins, whether it's been a combination of Nick Mullins and Joshua Dobbs, or even last year with Sam Darnold, just continues to put up all kinds of fancy goodness. So as you guys can, as our YouTube fan can see, appreciate you guys in this handy dandy graphic. Wide receiver 9, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 5, and most recently, wide receiver 4 again in PPR points per game. So again, Dwayne, it'd be a lot cooler if we knew we had an elite quarterback under center, but man, trusting Jefferson, trusting Kevin O'Connell, and trusting that volume that's continued to come his way. Again, we're pretty much checking all the boxes that we need here.
Yeah, I mean, the only question would be McCarthy. Like, if McCarthy's going to be the starter, like if he did a complete face plant somehow and, like, you know, had 190 passing yards per game, that's obviously going to impact, you know, Justin Jefferson. This year, it didn't work out that way with Sam Darnold. That was a risk. I know everybody hindsight now wants to look back and say, oh, it just doesn't matter. No, it didn't matter this time, guys. There's going to be other times where we can go back and look at quarterbacks like Sam Darnold. They didn't come through, and it did impact the wide receiver 1. So go look at DJ Moore, for example, with Chicago. You think Caleb Williams didn't impact DJ Moore? Absolutely he did. It wasn't his target competition. Guy still had a good target share, but it's the fact that Caleb Williams really flopped out of the gate. So if J.J. McCarthy were to flop, not saying that Justin Jefferson is not better than DJ Moore, it would still impact him. So I think that there is risk, especially if it's McCarthy. If we know Sam Darnold is also on the team, Ian, at least that's the safety net, and that makes things a lot easier. Obviously, you're not letting Justin Jefferson get out of the top 6 picks in your draft, but that's why I think you've got him at 4 or 5, thinking 6, not the guy that we would have number 1. Because I think, honestly, if you knew Sam Darnold was back for sure, you could make an argument that's really it's a decision between him and Ja'Marr Chase, and it really wouldn't be wrong either way you went.
I feel like it's more clear, though, again, at this point that we will give Chase that Burrow nod to your point, where, again, that is why Jefferson is at 104 for the time being. So, again, we'll see how things shake out with McCarthy. Not exactly a given to be the next, savior at quarterback, as much as Vikings fans, really wanted to make that a case. I loved, shout out Thor, our Dwayne's favorite guillotine rival over here on the show. I think the tweet, Dwayne, was something like, hey, people are trying to say that, McCarthy, if he had been playing last night, that the Vikings would have won that game. And that's ridiculous. We can't say that because they would have been on a bye, in the first place. So again, that's where the Vikings kind of mindset is at the time. Why not believe, in some good things like that? So, hey, we'll see what happens there. Overall, though, we'll point out that people that know far more about quarterbacks than Dwayne and myself, specifically the Athletics' Dane Brugler, have said that at least relative to this class's quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, he would have J.J. McCarthy ranked ahead of both of them. So certainly a very good prospect. Hopefully that knee is still all right after those multiple 2024 surgeries. So those were the first 4 picks, everyone. We got plenty more on the way right after this quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Hey, football fans, there's only a few short weeks left in the season, and we've got some exciting wild card games to look forward to now. Obviously, those in the rearview mirror, but now at the divisional round, how could you not be pumped? You can get in on the action right now with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. They're offering all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. Don't let this slip away. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Takes us to the 105, Dwayne. We've got 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers off the board. I'm looking back to another wide receiver, though, here, again, particularly in full PPR, and his name is C.D. Lamb, the wide receiver 1 from 2023. Fell back a little bit this year, but obviously that had a lot to do with first Dak Prescott only playing 8 games, and then C.D. himself having to play through a shoulder injury towards the end of the season. But even with that, man, we're talking about the overall PPR wide receiver 4 during the first 9 weeks of the year with a healthy Dak Prescott. And even with Cooper Rush, he managed to maintain standing as a wide receiver 1, specifically was the wide receiver 11 during that stretch. So not too bad considering what we've seen from other guys, forced to deal with that midseason quarterback change. And yes, I am talking about you, Tyreek Hill. So with the youthfulness, with the talent, with the higher end quarterback play, as much as people want to hate on Dak Prescott, guys, he is still a top 12 at worst real life quarterback. I think that combination, Dwayne, especially with the quarterback just situation being a bit more, I guess, established than what we're dealing with in Minnesota, you could argue only Ja'Marr Chase is really, checking those boxes more fully than CD.
He's in the same tier as the other two guys. Any one of these guys could be your wide receiver 1 overall next year. They're all great at earning targets. I will say Ja'Marr Chase, is the biggest threat of all of them to score at any moment from anywhere on the field. But these other two guys can also do that. Ja'Marr Chase is just at a different level. It's just, one of these unique situations where we get, a generational talent, honestly, is what we have with Ja'Marr Chase. But Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, also, you could argue that Justin Jefferson for sure, you can argue is also a generational talent. But Lamb's right there with them, man. Getting all the targets. They move him around the formation. We'll see what happens. Obviously, Mike McCarthy is out in Dallas. We'll see, is it going to be the Deion Sanders show? Who would he choose to be his offensive coordinator? Maybe they could go back to the well and go for Kellen Moore. We'll see where all of that shakes out. But the bottom line is, you mentioned it, you've got a quarterback that you've got great rapport with. You've got an offense that's going to be centered around the player, and number one, this is a really good player. CeeDee Lamb is a great player. So hard to find anything not to like, to be honest. You could take CeeDee Lamb as high as 1 overall in your fantasy draft, and I know some people will be like, oh man, that's so stupid, you got to take Ja'Marr Chase. But there's a lot of runouts where he's the number 1 player in fantasy next year. So I think he's a guy that anywhere in the top 5 to 6 picks, you should feel really good about clicking on his name.
There's a couple other wide receivers you could argue deserve to be in this conversation. Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We'll get to them in a little bit. Do you think there could be a couple factors that, a couple dominoes that fall this offseason, Dwayne, that maybe could make us move CD down a little bit? What I'm potentially envisioning is Deion Sanders coming to town. Basically only doing so they can trade up and draft Shedeur Sanders. And then they also go ahead and add another high-end, target competition to the equation. That would be the only way. But even then, I don't think CD's falling further than wide receiver 6 or 7 at the lowest.
Man, if they brought in Shedeur Sanders and they're going to let him start, that would definitely give me concern. Obviously, how far would we push him down the board? He's still going to be a first-round pick. But man, Shedeur Sanders, I'm just now starting to watch all these college players. We're starting to ramp up for the NFL draft, but not crazy about it, man. Yeah. And reading a lot from the people that I know have already been watching the film, they're not crazy about Shedeur Sanders. Now, look, we're not right on all these guys. These players can't come out and surprise, but what you just mentioned, if they added T. Higgins and drafted Shedeur Sanders, yes, CeeDee Lamb would be moving down the board. But that's the kind of thing it would take to move him down.
And again, that could be true for any of these other guys. It's not a slight against CD, but that would, again, make his just overall profile for how we're feeling that much worse there. So don't have any reason to believe Dak's not going to be the guy in Dallas. Still have many, many millions of reasons why, again, that should be the case. But knowing Jerry in the year 2025 never can be too sure. So again, CD at the 105 for Meow. Moving on, though, Dwayne at the 106 is the man we saw do some big things last night. Puka Nacua, Rams wide receiver 1. Someone who, I'll be honest, I was wondering coming into this year, not that I had him, I think I had him wide receiver 11 compared to wide receiver 8 consensus. Wasn't completely out on the guy, but I thought a healthier Cooper Kupp could still make this a competition. Now, giving Kupp credit, again, playing through that high ankle sprain for a lot of the season, maybe he wasn't at 100%, but man, even 100% Cooper Kupp has not looked as good as Puka Nacua has looked, I would say, in the second half of the year. Sent a chart out, on the old Twitter sphere yesterday where it was just yards per route run on the x-axis, targets per route run on the y-axis, a lot of really good wide receivers in the upper right quadrant. And then you had to literally move your eyes up even further, Dwayne, to find my man's Puka. He literally just efficiency-wise has had one of the best seasons here in recent memory. He was the overall PPR wide receiver 2, only behind Ja'Marr Chase when he actually returned in week 8 through week 17. I mean, the only issue I could find here is, unfortunately, if Mrs. Matthew Stafford's last year in LA.
Yeah, man. I mean, when you look at Puka, you already mentioned the yards per route run, leads the NFL with 3.39 yards per route run. That's first.
That is unreal. That's more than
insane. Now, a lot of that does come back to McVay. I mean, you've got a 30% motion rate for Puka. That's 31%. That's number 4 in the league. So they move him all over the formation. He also gets a lot of screen targets. So there's padding to his targets per route run, which obviously impacts your yards per route run because you got to get a target to get a catch to get a yard. And those things all go together. They correlate. So Puka Nacua, if you take those plays away, I don't think we would look at him as being, someone that, is probably a top 12 wide receiver in the NFL. But the fact of the matter is, he gets all of those things. And Sean McVay has shown over the history he is going to dial those sort of things up for his best playmaker on offense. That used to be Cooper Kupp, is now Puka Nacua. And the one thing I think we can give, Puka great credit for, I'm not trying to say he's not a good player because he is. This dude, when you get the ball in his hands, I see why you want to do it at the line of scrimmage. He basically turns into a running back. And then he's also great as far as body control goes. And we've seen multiple times this year just getting to the sideline and getting that, pass dotted to him by Matthew Stafford in between the zone defenders. And he gets those toes down. Like a little bit more activity down in the end zone, down in the red zone, that'd be nice. But beggars can't be choosers. Puka Nacua, definitely one of these top wide receivers for next year. And man, you have to argue, there's not a better, scheme as far as wide receivers go than what you get with Sean McVay once he dials in and he decides you're the dude. And that's what we have here. So Puka Nacua, he could be the wide receiver 1 overall next year. Like that could absolutely happen. He can have a Cooper Kupp season from what we saw, 3 or 4 years ago, where Cooper Kupp smashed everybody. It was the wide receiver 1 overall. So Puka has that in the range of outcomes.
Look, we've obviously seen a ton of success from Cooper Kupp's Triple Crown year himself, Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods. We've seen a lot of good wide receivers in this McVay offense. But when it was Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods mostly doing their thing there, it's like Puka Nacua is kind of getting both those roles at this point, Dwayne. I mean, he's got 23 rush attempts over these last 2 seasons. That's what they would usually give Bobby Trees a lot. And again, getting those shorter design screen stuff that Cooper Kupp used to be able to make a lot more out of. That is, I guess, what makes me more confident that even if Stafford's gone, let's say he's out of the picture, I don't know who would be the starting quarterback. Please, for the love of God, don't be Jimmy Garoppolo. Hopefully it's Stafford. But we've seen, from Calvin Johnson, the Golden Tate, to everything in Los Angeles. Yes, Stafford is one of the better wide receiver whisperers in recent memory. If we do go from, again, more of an A quarterback, though, to more of a B sort of player, say Geno Smith, for example, I do think those 2 skills you mentioned, the ability to still turn screens into big yards with the yak, and just some great contested catch goodness, particularly on the sideline, as you shouted out, I have a hard time thinking that Puka is going to be sliding too far past the beginning of round 2 at the worst. We're going to get through the rest of the wide receivers. Maybe Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. you could warrant, but after that, man, I really would have a hard time pushing him much further.
And he would still be in their tier, and you could be wrong by taking someone over them because of how insulated his role is. And to your point, it's a really good one. A lesser quarterback could still come in and feed this man. We'd like it to be someone like Stafford that we know can still unlock all areas of the field. Yes, Stafford, not quite what he was a few years ago, but the arm strength is not a question, Ian. If they can get it dialed up and get the right play call, we know Stafford can deliver. So yeah, with Puka, it's again, that role is so insulating, all the screens, all the motion, all the things that just make it so hard for opposing defenses to really try to take him away and put the clamps on him. It's really tough to double a guy like Puka Nacua based on alignment, formations, all those different things that Sean McVay is so brilliant at.
All right, guys, we've had a run of wide receivers here with Jetta, C.D. Lamb, and then Puka Nacua. Now we're going back to a running back. Dwayne kind of mentioned this group before. Our first one off the board was Saquon Barkley, second Bijan Robinson, and next up at third out of the 107 is the reigning overall RB1, Jahmyr Gibbs. So, yes, he did get assisted from not having Montgomery at the end of the season. RB7, RB2, and RB1 finishes most notably with that 4-touchdown, phenomenal performance in Week 18. But even before that, Dwayne, in weeks 1 through 15, we're still talking about the RB5 in PPR points per game with David Montgomery. So, hey, that's what averaging 5.5 yards per carry and catching 52 passes in back-to-back seasons will do for you. And it is that latter, I guess, just enhancement to his game that gives me more, I guess, confidence that Gibbs can still consistently return these high-end upside RB1 finishes, even with Montgomery in the picture. I mean, only Devon Achane and Alvin Kamara actually had more PPR points from receiving than Gibbs this season. And it's not that he didn't have that tool set as a rookie, but really wasn't producing, man. Like the hilarious thing that we were pointing out, he had similar receiving production to Ezekiel Elliott in the year 2023, can no longer make that joke in 2024. So great stuff from Gibbs. Yes, if we didn't have Monty, we could talk about him as the overall, RB1, maybe the overall just player number 1, Dwayne, but even as it stands, really tough to move him much lower.
Yeah, if you didn't have Montgomery, he would be, if you just had Sonic and no Knuckles, he would be the number 1 player on all boards. But I think, again, this is still a major hat tip to him that you're putting him in the middle of the first round, despite the fact that we know that David Montgomery is going to have a role. They just re-upped the guy, so he's not going to completely go away. Could we see, is it possible that Jahmyr Gibbs, after showing off what he's able to do, this second half or these last 4 to 5 games without David Montgomery, could they give him a little bit bigger role? I mean, yeah, they could. But there's no guarantee that's going to happen. To your point, though, still been a really good player, even with Montgomery, averaging those 18.7 fantasy points per game when you have Monty also on the field. I mean, when you look at Gibbs, obviously, Ian, so many things to like. Number one is the explosive playmaking ability. 16% of his carries have gone 10-plus yards. That ranks number one in the NFL, averaging 2.31 yards after contact. That's third in the NFL, only behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. Well, actually, sorry. If I'm using a cutoff here of where I made these guys have the 150 attempts, which cut off some guys. Sorry, Tank Bigsby, and there's some other players that also did really good in this category. Yeah. And Bucky Irving. So if we look at the tackles avoided, though, also really good. 25% according to True Media. That's fifth in the NFL for the guys that got over the threshold that I was looking at. So, yeah, he does everything. Catches passes out of the backfield, can earn targets, explosive playmaker. So those things help offset the fact that you're going to have to share some time with David Montgomery. And, it's the Lions, one of the offenses we like more than any other. If we had to put money down right now on which offense is going to score the most touchdowns next year, the favorite would be the Lions.
And accordingly, Dwayne, our next player up also plays for the Lions, and it is our one true sun god, Amon-Ra St. Brown, at the 108 spot. Look, ever since his rookie season, which he really did catch fire with, in the second half of the year, he's ripped off the wide receiver 11, wide receiver 4, and most recently wide receiver 5 finishes in PPR points per game. We saw Jameson Williams manage to have over 1,000 yards this year, and that still didn't stop our one true sun god from balling out. Now, Sam Laporta took a bit of a back seat. We have seen Gibbs's, receiving role and just production be enhanced. Do you think, Dwayne, there's enough factors here to make this too high for Amon-Ra St. Brown? Because we also do need to remember, it does seem like Ben Johnson, is a candidate to be taking his talents elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't think we can overthink it. He's just been so consistent. You can see it here on the screen. I mean, wide receiver 28, and then he is in a full-time role the next year, wide receiver 11, 4, and 5. So, yeah, Sam Laporta was probably hurt early in the year. He is taking away a few targets here recently. You got Jameson Williams and his emergence. But at the same time, you've got an offense that's just loaded with playmakers that can also lead to points. I do think Ben Johnson's going to be gone, Ian, and that's obviously would be a concern. But I think players still matter so much more than the coaches. And look, coaches really do matter. And Ben Johnson has been amazing in dialing these things up. But it's just kind of hard to screw things up when you got Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, assuming you've got a healthy quarterback in Jared Goff. You've also got a good offensive line that's honestly played through a lot of injuries this year. So looking at the Lions, it's just hard to find a way, even though you might say it's a little more crowded, to push Amon-Ra St. Brown out of the top 12. I think there's some guys that we're going to talk about in a minute that you could make an argument should be over Amon-Ra St. Brown. But when I say over, in the same tier and over Amon-Ra St. Brown. And when we talk about these tiers, guys, we do it for a reason, because really there's a range of outcomes where any one of them could be the best guy from that group for the season. There's a lot of weird things that happen once you click play on the football season and real bullets start flying, and the injuries and all the different things that you guys know can happen. You've been playing fantasy. It can be a very humbling game, but we are looking at all the different factors, and he is definitely one of these guys that should be in that. I don't put him in the same tier. There is a tier break, right? So I think that's the big thing. You've got Jamar Chase, you've got Justin Jefferson, you've got CeeDee Lamb, and you've got a tier break, and then you're getting down to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would say Puka Nacua also above that tier break ahead of Amon-Ra.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, it would be ideal to have Ben Johnson back in town, but I'm with you. Jims and Joes over the X's and O's. And honestly, why would the Lions offense even change that noticeably without Ben Johnson? Maybe have a few less cool trick plays in the bag. I get it, but still got Jared Goff, still got Dan Campbell, that offensive line, still got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Really tough time not seeing him putting up all kinds of big numbers again, with another workload likely exceeding 140 targets. So got our pair of Lions in the top 8. Now, guys, we do have some tougher, guys who you might be surprised to see in the bottom part of the first round to get to right after a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Sunday. Time to suit up.
This is like half zips, kind of quarter zip guy.
And sacrifice your body.
This is fun.
Because no matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
All right, Dwayne, maybe the lowest we have seen our next player ranked here in a preseason, sort of mock draft in years, and that is the former Mr. 101, Christian McCaffrey, coming in at the 9 spot here. So obviously incredibly disappointing season for anyone that drafted him, and even if you didn't draft him this year, you saw what it was also like to experience him on the sideline during the 2020 and 2021 seasons. The question, Dwayne, is how much of what happened last year is predictable to maybe cause him to miss time again in 2025? Because if he's out there, we know he's going to have one of the most fantasy-friendly roles in all the league. And guess what? When he is out there, he produces like one of the best players in the league as well.
Yeah, for sure. But the risk is also very real. I mean, we're talking about a player that's up there in age. He's got a lot of touches on him. And you mentioned earlier, right? It's really not age curves anymore that we think about. It's just cliff years, right? Can they hit the cliff? And I think it's possible for Christian McCaffrey, but that's why you're seeing him push down here towards the end of round 1, because also it is the 49ers. I think we can all agree, like, it was kind of a weird season for the 49ers. Everything that could possibly go wrong for them did go wrong for them, other than losing their quarterback, for the season early in the year. But it was a rough year as far as injuries go for this team. So when you look at Christian McCaffrey, even for the games we got him in, it's you look at it and it's like, okay, 12.4 fantasy points per game. Honestly, I should take one of those games out. Let's just really look at like weeks 10 through 12, because in week 13, that's the game that he left with the injury. And so, I mean, he averaged 13.7 fantasy points per game, but like, they really still had him in the same role. He had an 8.8 utilization score, so 88% of the snaps, 76% of the rushing attempts, 78% route participation. Dude still had a 19% target share. I mean, look, you come out and you get that sort of workload on the 49ers, like, you're going to be really good most games. Like, it didn't work out for him this season. So there still is a ceiling. I do think it's a question, and we're about to talk about some other guys. One of them, actually 2 of the guys we're about to talk about next, I would for sure take over Christian McCaffrey. But again, at the same time, you could see this happening, Ian, where Christian McCaffrey gets pushed down to like early round 2 territory because people are like, I've had it, man. It's been a failure more years than not. I'm tired of spending this high pick. But to your point, like, if he is healthy, like, he could win you a fantasy league at that point. So I think the upside is there, but there's obviously a massive, there's a huge issue with what the floor looks like, because at this point, I think we just have to say, and I know we don't do this about very many players, but at this point in his career, like, he's injury prone, like, and he's came into this year with ailments that like didn't sound good for long term with the Achilles, and it ended up being both of them. Like, man, there's some major questions here.
There are some major questions. We're going to definitely be, working with a lot of doctors throughout this offseason to kind of get their take on what they believe it is going to be for CMC health-wise ahead of 25. He did recently say he is close to being fully recovered from that later PCL issue. He had already put the Achilles tendonitis in the rearview mirror. I don't love that I need to be muttering, those phrases as we're, trying to profile this guy. But Dwayne, I mean, I don't think it'd be ridiculous for someone to rank CMC 15th or something. But that said, where would you rank him in the flex ranks come week 1 when he's healthy? Probably 1.
Yeah. And again, that's the difference between week 1 ranks. And it's always a good question to ask yourself, right? Because you need to be aware of that. Yeah. If CMC healthy, we're going into week 1, there's no way he's not in the top 3, right? And the ranks overall, like, to your point, flex ranks, we're talking wide receivers, tight ends, running backs all together. But the question is, can he sustain it? That's the thing that you've got to be able to do. Obviously, if he was healthy the whole year, we would be ranking him up there pretty much every single week. And that is, again, what would make him an absolute steal in round 2 if it worked out in the correct way for you. I just think there's some other guys down here, and there's enough risk with CMC. There's also the potential for a little bit of fall off, like as far as his, production goes on the touches. Maybe the 49ers decide, we really should like try to supplement this guy. Maybe bringing him back last year and immediately just piling on all the workload wasn't the best idea. Now, guys, going back to the injury, it was a fluky thing. It wasn't a compensatory injury. It was just look, it happens. Injuries happen when you get this many carries. So not trying to call out Kyle Shanahan. We all wanted to see CMC, but I just think these other guys, Ian, that we're about to talk about, I think they're locked into really good roles as well. And they're just, well, for the most part, they're younger. One of them's not.
It was wild to see that workload with Jordan Mason, I think averaging like the most rushing yards per game in the NFL, like immediately as, CMC was left off. So if that's not going to cause him to take a back seat, I don't know what will. But let's talk about that other running back here who's going to close out our top 10, who, yes, is not younger than CMC, but also, yes, might not even be the same species as CMC. Of course, I'm talking about our one true king, Derrick Henry, turned 31 on January 4th. He has 300 plus touches in 5 of the last 6 seasons. But my God, Dwayne, again, other than the injury gods just striking our man down, which I'm knocking on wood, I pray that does not happen. I don't know how Henry is going to be busting next season. He is going to be getting 300 plus carries and an offense we fully expect to be a top 5 group, both in terms of the yards before contact and the scoring upside. No, we're not getting the receptions here. We never have, though. I mean, Derrick Henry, again, especially in half and standard formats, really, really tough to just craft a, downside scenario as amazingly as it was that we managed to do so last year.
Yeah, and it's funny like how much we swing from year to year in the fantasy community. And it's not just, folks out here drafting, it's the fantasy analysts, and the folks that are crunching the numbers themselves, So we are a year removed from some folks not wanting to take Derrick Henry until round 3 due to age and all these massive concerns. And now they're just all out the window because of one good year. And I say one good year. The guy's had multiple good years, but because of a great year this year. Now, again, fantasy points are one of the best predictors for future fantasy points. In fact, they are the best predictor whenever you're just looking at year over year. It's not yards per carry. It's not, why would you say yards per carry, Dwayne? That's one of the worst things, but looking at, just yardage, looking at touchdowns, all those sort of things. Like you put it all together, fantasy points are better than any one of them. And it was a great year for Derrick Henry. But I think the things that we can look at, Ian, that make you feel good, and you started to talk about some of those things, but it's the scheme, man. You get to play with Lamar Jackson, and we've seen it for years. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, pretty much anyone who's been back there with Lamar Jackson has had the advantage of defenses having to worry about him getting to the edge or just worrying about him and however they're scheming it up. And that leaves these massive holes for the running backs. And when the running back is now named Derrick Henry, who is still hitting these top end speeds, you talked about it yesterday, the next gen stat, the one I love, man, is like that average miles per hour at the line of scrimmage, that acceleration, that size. It's just tough to handle. It doesn't matter if he's 30 or 31 years old. He's moving fast enough and he's big enough that's a major challenge for pretty much anyone to get him on the ground. And we've obviously seen that with Henry this year. Obviously, as far as his yards his yards after contact ranks 3rd in the NFL, 3.64. You look at the explosive rush rate. Obviously, you guys have seen the highlights of him just taking off down the field for 60, 70 yards at a time. Everybody's seen these same things. And sorry, I did butcher it earlier. I was talking about yards before contact. I was looking at the wrong column instead of yards after contact. Was that when I was talking about Jahmyr Gibbs? So my bad on that. But yeah, Derrick Henry, awesome player. I agree. He's going to be an end of round 1 pick. I can't really disagree with it. Obviously, age can sneak up on you really fast. That's the thing that's pushing him down this low. If you weren't worried about his age at all and this guy was 25, like how high would you have Derrick Henry?
My gosh. A couple spots higher, definitely over CMC and stuff. I still think some of the receiving
he'd be
stuff.
Over Amon-Ra.
Yeah.
I think he'd be middle of first round.
Yeah. So feeling good about it either way. I will say, Dwayne, just in general, look, I don't blame you guys if you do prefer Puka and Gibbs over Henry, even if their ADPs end up being swapped and all that. One lesson I know we kind of talked about this year, Dwayne, and we've, obviously addressed in the past as well. When you're dealing with any player in the top 10, top 20, probably not the range of guys to be completely out on, right? You want to have good exposure, particularly when you're doing hundreds of best ball contests or you're entering 30 leagues like us. You better be really freaking confident to be out on anyone with a top 3 round ADP.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, to your point, like if you're just going to get to draft one time, there's a lot of guys here that deserve to be grouped together. So take the one you want. Seriously, it's really going to come down to you get lucky or unlucky. Do they suffer an injury? Is there some freak thing that drives down their value for the season? And those are the things that ultimately give us so much turnover in our top 12 every year in fantasy. A lot of times it doesn't come back to the player and the talent or even the preseason evaluation. It does come down to things that are completely out of your control once that season starts.
So as we get into our last 2 guys, I'm going to open up the discussion basically to these 2 spots and the 2 obvious guys who are not remaining, because I do think it's a pretty clear top 10. Okay, if you want to take McCaffrey out, I can understand those reasons, but at least those top 9, I have a including Derrick Henry. I would expect those to be in most people's, versions of this. I have A.J. Brown as my 11th overall pick, Dwayne, and I have Nico Collins as my 12th. I understand Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. Even Devon Achane did a lot last season as well to warrant discussion in here. My take is that A.J. Brown is a bit more solidified in terms of an offense sense. Yes, we did see Neighbors and BTJ survive with bad quarterback play, but also we're in offenses that didn't have as much competition. That could be a new variable we have to figure out for them. Meanwhile, with AJB, we've seen them for years with Devonta Smith still beyond these 140, 150 target paces. Only going to be 28 in June. Still believe he is one of, if not the very best wide receiver in the NFL. Second yards per route run behind only Puka Nacua. Very good with his opportunities despite that early season hamstring injury. And then I think even less, explanation needs to be around Nico Collins, someone who, when you look at his yards and targets per route run, again, right up there with really anyone ever since CJ Stroud gone to town, should have less target competition than ever. Stephon Diggs maybe out of the picture. Tank Dell's someone who, again, probably not going to be ready by week 1, even if he is. Kind of saw that separation before the injury anyway. Really do think Nico is a great talent with the upside to breeze past 150 targets, and he should be here. I know, though, Dwayne, you're a little bit pessimistic about AJB being ahead of some of these, upcoming second-year talents.
Yeah, so just a few quick things. Number one, I would have Derrick Henry ahead of Christian McCaffrey. Like we have concerns about both their ages, but McCaffrey's also comes with more recent injuries, also potential injuries that could be, he's gonna has to continue to nurse. So I look at those two players and I think, okay, if CMC ran completely pure and got this huge workload and suddenly looked like he was 25, he could score 30 fantasy points per game. Like that's something Derrick Henry can't do. But at the same time, I just saw Derrick Henry come out here and have a great year, and he fits that scheme so well. Why do I really need to risk it and take a guy that's been injured more over these last few years? And then I would say Nico Collins is a player for me that I would have he's in the same tier as Puka Nacua and CeeDee Lamb, in my opinion. That's what he's ascended to this point. You talked about it, the yards per route run sitting at 2.94. That is second in the NFL. We've got a guy that we know can, obviously, if you have a yards per route run, that's great. We obviously know that you can also earn targets, but they also get him involved in the screen game. There's just a lot of things going right for Nico Collins. The main question would be CJ Stroud. It's kind of been a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, a really great year 1, not so good year 2. Did have a nice game last week. I would feel even better about Nico if CJ really finished out the playoff strong, somehow got a win against the Chiefs and went off against them as well. Like that would go a little bit of a ways for me, because I do think that Stroud right now is a question mark, a guy that we honestly couldn't even start in fantasy once you got to week 7 or 8. It was like, okay, CJ Stroud is just not a top 12 fantasy quarterback. And while fantasy and real life, they're not the same thing, Ian, they come down to a lot of the same things. You need yards, you need touchdowns to win games, you need yards and touchdowns to score fantasy points. So sometimes I think we get too twisted over real life football versus fantasy. They really do all converge. So I think that's the biggest question. But man, I would have him right there with Puka. The thing with Nico is this: I think he could finish as the wide receiver 1. I don't know that with A.J. Brown right now, because they're going to have Barkley back. I know they want to run the ball. And now, honestly, over the last year and a half, I have questions around Jalen Hurts. Like, we're back to having questions around Jalen Hurts as a passer as well, at least as many questions as I have about Stroud, right? I think I have questions about both of them. So I think A.J. Brown falls to the bottom of this bucket for me. Nico Collins moves up. And then to your point, A.J. Brown versus Malik Neighbors. A.J. Brown versus Brian Thomas Jr. And there's other names, and we're gonna talk about some more on our next show. There's a lot of names, honestly, we could talk about here. I think those are two that are at the top. I do think I lean to those guys because with A.J. Brown, and look, here's the thing, man. A.J. Brown's a great player, guys, and we want to draft great players. He's got 35% target share this year. Like, that's astronomical. It's one of the best in the league. You put this dude on the Vikings, with Kevin O'Connell, he's probably a top 3 wide receiver. You put him on some of these other offenses. You let him play Puka Nacua's role for the Rams, he's probably the wide receiver 1. So talent is not an issue for A.J. Brown, but we do have the concerns around how often the Eagles are going to throw and Jalen Hurts. So the offseason is going to matter here. What are the Giants going to do at quarterback? Because right now, like, it's not good, man. None of the answers are good as far as what the Giants could do next year. So they have to do something at quarterback that gets us excited. And you just talked about it. It's not a good quarterback class, Ian. So I think, you're still going to have some issues. I do lean to Brian Thomas Jr. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the name that you could sneak into the end of the first round. He already showed that he could do it with a backup quarterback in Mac Jones. As much as I love to rag on Trevor Lawrence, like he's better than Mac Jones, and Trevor Lawrence has shown that he can have these nice games. Christian Kirk, nice player, but Ian, he's never been a 25, 30% target share guy. He's like 18 to 20. You can overcome that. Evan Ingram, he's not a huge target. Now he is once everyone else is injured, they'll pepper him and he can get 25% target share then. But like when the offense is healthy and doing his thing, like he's 16, 17, 18%. So yeah, I think there's room here for Brian Thomas Jr. to truly ascend. And again, another guy similar to Jamar Chase is the big thing that gets me, man. You can let him work down the field, which is mostly what he did early in the year, and he can win. You can throw him a slant and let him just outrun all the angles and score a touchdown. He can win. You can get design, opportunities for him around the line of scrimmage. You can move him all over the formation. I really do think he's a guy that we could be thinking, really it's him and Nico Collins are both of that vein. And so I think you could make an argument that Brian Thomas Jr. should be ranked in the tier with CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua. I don't think you can because we've seen it from those guys more. But I mean, he could easily do it, and we could be at the end of next year being like, man, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 3 in our rankings for 2026. Like, that's totally a possibility.
And obviously ADP will start to play a role in this once we get into that whole, song and dance. Yeah, guess what, guys? If everyone is drafting BTJ as the 8th player overall, I'm going to be adjusting things. So Lord knows I'm not trying to fade a man of his status. So much, much more, though, on BTJ and neighbors coming this entire offseason. And especially tomorrow when myself, Dwain, and the great Chris Allen go through, again, a bunch of other guys who really could have a say in getting into round 1. So fun times. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe, all that jazz if you feel the need. But for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.